The smell of fresh bread wafted from my kitchen, and that's what they said got me in trouble. Let that sink in for a second. A couple of months back, I opened my mailbox to find a letter from my HOA claiming I owed $350,000 for odor pollution and a laundry list of other nonsense. At first, I thought it was a sick joke or some clerical mix-up. But the deeper I dug, the weirder it got. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. Strange cars started cruising down my street at odd hours. One night, someone left a smashed loaf of bread on my porch like a warning. All I can tell you is something was rotten in Willow Creek, and it wasn't my sourdough. My name's Ethan Carter, 32, and I guess you could say I took a hard left from the life everyone expected of me. My family runs Carter Properties, one of the biggest real estate firms in downtown Boise, Idaho. I was supposed to slip into tailored suits, shake hands with developers, and rake in millions flipping office buildings. Instead, I bought a small farm in Willow Creek, a quiet suburb with rolling fields and cottonwood trees that catch the morning light just right. I wanted to bake bread. Call it a crazy dream, but I'd always loved working with my hands kneading dough, watching it rise, feeling the heat of an oven. When I found this property, a fixer-upper with a weathered barn, it felt like fate. The old owner, a kind widower named George, handed me the keys with a trembling smile, saying he was glad someone young would breathe life back into the place. I spent 6 months restoring the farmhouse and turning the barn into a commercial kitchen, jumping through every hoop: permits, health inspections, the works. Most of the neighbors loved it. Clara Thompson, a 70-year-old sweetheart who lived next door, became my first regular, stopping by every Tuesday for a dozen brioche rolls for her grandkids. We'd sit on my porch, sipping coffee, her telling stories about her late husband's vegetable garden, me dreaming about expanding my bakery. But then there was Vivian Holt, 50, with sleek silver hair always tied back so tight it looked like it hurt. She carried a fancy fountain pen like it was a badge of honor. Vivian was the HOA president, and word around Willow Creek was she'd forced at least 3 families out of their homes over petty violations, things like a slightly off-color fence or a car parked an inch too far into the street. The first time she saw my bakery setup, her face twisted like she'd swallowed sour milk. She stormed up to my door, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 neighbors who stood behind her like silent bodyguards. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we need to discuss your activities." The way she spat out activities made it sound like I was running a meth lab, not a bakery. I stayed calm, invited her in, showed her my permits, offered her coffee. She wasn't interested. She stood in my kitchen, eyeing my mixer and oven like they were contraband, and declared that Willow Creek was a prestigious community with standards I was violating. She snapped photos of everything: me permits on the wall, my equipment, even my backyard through the window. I'd read the HOA bylaws cover to cover before buying the place, and there wasn't a single rule against a licensed home-based business. I pointed this out, showed her the relevant pages, but she just gave me this thin, icy smile and said, "We'll see about that, won't we?" Then she marched out, her silent posse trailing behind. 2 weeks later, the $350,000 fine arrived. Odor pollution, unauthorized commercial activity, inappropriate vehicles. The accusations were absurd. I gripped the paper so hard it crumpled, my name staring back at me in bold print. No mistake. Just pure insanity. Baking bread wasn't exactly a chemical spill. Clara knocked on my door that same day, took one look at my face, and sat down heavily at my kitchen table. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "there's something you need to know about Vivian and this place." She told me how she'd lost her husband's workshop to HOA fines 3 years ago for noise violations from his woodworking. They'd had to sell a chunk of their land to cover the penalties. Then she dropped a bomb. Vivian had made multiple offers to buy my property from George before I got it, each one more aggressive than the last. George refused, saying she gave him the creeps. Clara leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. After every rejection, another neighbor got slapped with violations. It hit me like a punch. This wasn't about rules or standards. It was about power, intimidation, and something deeply personal. I spread the fines attached survey across my table next to my original property survey. The boundaries didn't match, not even close. 2 feet here, 3 feet there, but in real estate, a few feet can mean everything. Should I dig deeper or walk away? I probably should have hired a lawyer and called it a day, but I've never been good at backing down from bullies. Instead of panicking, I decided to fight back with what I knew best: bread. I spent the next morning crafting what I called the Liberty Loaf, shaped like a gavel with little dough gavels on each side. Then I had an idea either genius or completely unhinged. I baked a massive version, big enough to feed 50 people, and set up a table on my front lawn. By 10 a.m., a crowd had gathered, not just for bread but to hear me out. "This oven's not just baking loaves," I said, holding up the fine. "It's baking defiance." My bread wasn't just flour and yeast anymore. It was a symbol. Mrs. Larson from down the street bought 2 loaves and whispered that she'd gotten a warning letter from the HOA, threatening fines if she kept buying from me. That's when I knew this wasn't just my fight. The whole neighborhood was under Vivian's thumb. The survey attached to the fine was a mess: pixelated edges, mismatched fonts, signs of digital tampering. When I held it up to the light, I could see layers where text had been erased and rewritten. These weren't originals. Someone had doctored them, and recently. I started driving around Willow Creek, really looking at property lines. Vivian's sprawling colonial mansion sat on a corner lot, perfectly manicured, probably worth $2 million. But her back fence seemed to creep onto my land. I called my old college buddy, Mike, a county surveyor, keeping it vague to avoid trouble. He said forged surveys were common in high-value areas where a few feet could mean big money. "Hire a pro surveyor," he advised. "It's worth it." So I called Thompson Land Surveying and booked them for the next week. Then I noticed something else: a water line running from Vivian's property across what my survey said was my land, connecting to her irrigation system. No way that was legal without my permission, which I'd never given. I followed it, snapping photos, measuring distances. It ran 15 feet into my property. Either my survey was wrong, or Vivian was using my land like it was hers. That night, I couldn't sleep. Clara's story about Vivian's obsession with my land kept circling in my head. I found a buried offer letter from months ago and signed, offering a suspiciously precise amount for my property. The return address? HOA headquarters. I dove into the county assessor's website, digging through records back to the 1980s. Around 4 a.m., I found a 1992 survey from when Willow Creek was developed. It showed my lot extending further than the current records claimed. Part of Vivian's land was originally mine. Someone had rewritten history. I called a former coworker to double-check deed signatures. They hadn't been digitized, meaning someone had seen the originals. But who? Finding a surveyor was tougher than I expected. 3 firms ghosted me or backed out when I mentioned the address. Finally, I found Sarah Thompson, a no-nonsense surveyor with 20 years of experience. She took one look at my documents and said, "These numbers don't add up with the county's records. Someone's been playing fast and loose." My stomach churned. Was I in over my head? Sarah set up her laser equipment and walked my property line. By noon, she had results that flipped everything. "Mr. Carter," she said, showing me her tablet, "Vivian Holt's mansion extends 3 feet, 2 inches onto your land. Her house, patio, and half her 3-car garage were illegally built on my property, 800 square feet, at over $1,000 per square foot." Sarah pulled up Vivian's construction permits from 6 years ago. The original plans respected the boundaries, but the final inspection showed the house shifted over the line. "This isn't a mistake," Sarah said. "It's systematic land theft." I was livid but went to my kitchen to knead dough. It helps me think. As I worked, the pieces fell into place. Vivian wasn't just stealing my land. She was running a years-long fraud scheme, using her HOA power to cover it up. Fake surveys, inflated fines, intimidation. It was all to force me out before I caught on. I dug into Vivian's other HOA activities, poring over public records. The pattern was chilling. Families hit with petty violations, escalating fines, then lowball offers from shell companies tied to Vivian. I showed Clara the HOA meeting minutes. None had resident signatures. "Were you ever notified about boundary changes?" I asked. She shook her head, stunned. This wasn't just about me. The whole neighborhood had been manipulated. The satellite overlay confirmed it. Vivian's house sat on my land. Every fraudulent transfer involved Precision Land Associates, the same company behind my fake survey. Vivian's shadow was everywhere, like smoke from a fire she'd started years ago. I wanted to shred those papers, but instead, I planned my next move. This wasn't just about property Anna Maria, it was about justice for everyone she'd crushed. I got a text from an unknown number. She's done this before. You're not her first. It sent chills down my spine. The next morning, I started on my masterpiece, not just bread, but a three-dimensional cake map of Willow Creek, taking up half my kitchen table. Each house was crafted in buttercream, with red frosting marking Vivian's stolen land like bloodstains. I sent handwritten invites to every neighbor for a Saturday gathering. Come learn the truth about your neighborhood. When 43 people crowded into my backyard, some looked skeptical. Mrs. Evans, arms crossed, said, "This isn't our fight, Ethan." I knew I had to prove it. "This isn't just a cake," I said, voice steady. "It's a crime scene." I laid out the evidence. Fake surveys, shell companies, forced sales. I showed Sarah's report, proving Vivian's mansion was on my land. The crowd went silent, leaning in to see the red-frosted violations. Then Vivian showed up, uninvited, pushing through like she owned the place. Her face paled when she saw the cake. "This is ridiculous," she stammered. "Ethan's having a breakdown." I was ready. "Mrs. Holt," I said loudly, "care to explain why your mansion is 3 feet onto my property?" I held up Sarah's report. "This is from a licensed surveyor. Your house, patio, and garage are on stolen land." The crowd murmured, shifting away from her. She tried to deflect, saying property lines were complex, but her voice cracked. Then Rachel Brooks, a 28-year-old lawyer with a sharp edge, stepped forward. "You tricked me into signing boundary adjustments I didn't understand," she said, staring Vivian down. "We can't ignore this." Others spoke up, Mrs. Larson about her warning letter, the Garcias about fines for their kids' skateboards. Vivian's composure crumbled, her hands shaking as she glanced toward the street like she might bolt. I cut a piece of cake through her red-frosted mansion and handed it to Clara. "This isn't just about property lines," I said. "I've sent all this evidence, recordings of Mrs. Holt's threats, in Cladetto, someone you don't want to mess with." Vivian's face went ghost white. She whispered to her assistant, "Start the countermeasures." "He's gone public," and stumbled away. I waited 48 hours, watching her drive by my house, probably scrambling to cover her tracks. Someone left a burned, shredded photo of my cake on my doorstep. But her intimidation tactics were losing their bite. On Tuesday, I set up a table in my yard with a Bluetooth speaker. 30 neighbors gathered, Vivian among them, uninvited again. I pressed play, and her voice filled the air. "Just pressure him with fines until he has to sell." The crowd gasped, chairs scraped, a coffee mug shattered. Another clip played. "I don't care what the property lines are. Make the paperwork say what I need." Then another, discussing shell companies and lowball offers. Faces turned from shock to rage. Vivian stammered, "Those recordings are illegal." I smiled. In this state, one voice can burn a liar, and mine's loud enough. I held up a return receipt from the Boise FBI field office. I sent everything: recordings, Sarah's report, shell company evidence 3 days ago. Wire and mail fraud are federal crimes. Then I showed a second envelope sent to the county prosecutor and state bar. Mrs. Evans, who'd once called me overly sensitive, stood up, voice trembling. "I signed your penalty letter, Ethan. I'm sorry. I didn't know we were helping a criminal." The crowd turned on Vivian, some slipping away in shame for enabling her. The FBI moved fast. Within a week, they froze Vivian's accounts, seized Precision Land Associates records, and linked her to similar schemes in 3 other towns. She'd been a professional land thief, turning neighbors into unwitting accomplices. The HOA voted her out in an emergency session, banning her from future involvement. Rachel helped file the paperwork, ensuring it was airtight. Vivian faced federal charges for wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy, plus state charges for forgery and theft. The civil court ordered restitution. Her mansion and shell company properties were seized and sold. I watched yellow tape go up around her house, agents carrying out boxes. She owed $2 million to victims, plus $500,000 in punitive damages. My share? $1,250,000 for stolen land, plus $50,000 from the HOA's insurance. The $350,000 fine was voided. The new owners, the Martinez family, tore down her illegal fence and built a swing set where kids now play. 6 months later, As I prepared for the grand reopening of Freedom Bakery, a beat-up sedan pulled into my driveway. A man in his 60s stepped out, holding a bottle of Idaho huckleberry syrup. "Thought your cakes could use something sweet," he said. He introduced himself as Paul, Vivian's ex-husband. Over coffee, he explained her obsession. "She found a 1970s geological survey claiming oil under your land," he said. "She spent years chasing it. A modern survey showed no oil. Her entire scheme was built on a 40-year-old mistake. She saw dollar signs where you saw a home," he said, shaking his head. Vivian got 7 years in federal prison, her bridges burned, even her sister cutting contact. The Martinez kids brought me clay cookies from art class, uneatable but priceless. As I watched them play where Vivian's garage once stood, I realized what she never grasped. Some things are worth more than money. Freedom Bakery thrives now, with 2 local teens as apprentices and a community garden where Vivian's lies once grew. Clara teaches apple turnover recipes, and neighbors look out for each other. I used to think justice lived in courtrooms, but it rises in ovens too, folded into dough and shared with those who thought they were alone. Standing your ground isn't loud, it's quiet, unshakable, a refusal to let bullies erase you. The HOA newsletters? I frame them now. They make great wrapping for pies. Truth doesn't always need a gavel. Sometimes it's glazed in butter. What would you have done in my shoes? Fought back or walked away? Have you ever faced a bully who hid behind rules to control others? Was I too harsh on Vivian, or did she deserve everything she got? Should neighbors have spoken up sooner, or were they right to stay quiet until the truth was undeniable? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button if this story hit home, and subscribe for more tales of standing tall. I'm off to bake justice by the dozen. Catch you on the warm side of the oven.